William Thomas, who is the Director of Programs here at the Atlas Society. Will has a master's degree in economics, University of Michigan. He's taught economic history in the United States and in China. Has lectured in Indonesia, in Guatemala, Francisco Marroquin University down there. He is the editor of The Literary Art of Ayn Rand, which I believe you can purchase at the table right outside, and has co-authored the logical structure of objectivism. What is it, a beta version, I think? And for those of you who know Will, he has been running, I guess, every couple of weeks webinars for the last year or so that you can go and sign up for, and you can just watch them for free in your living room and interact and ask questions and do all that kind of stuff. So one of the new things we've been doing for the last year or so is webinars. Will is leading the way in the webinar category as well as part of our outreach. Anyway, today Will is going to talk about the values in Atlas Shrugged, and this is part 1, and the subject is going to be career. Some of you have them, some of you don't, some of you want one, and so Will is going to talk to us about that. So without further ado, my colleague Will Thomas.
Thanks, Ed. When I first read Atlas Shrugged, I did not get the full philosophical message. But I certainly heard Ayn Rand's message about the role of business, work, and career in life. In every chapter and in almost every scene, Atlas Shrugged puts us in a world where how one does one's work is the best measure of who one really is. Consider the Prince of Copper Mining, Francisco de Anconia. I work for his company, de Anconia Copper. When we see him not at work, he seems to be a playboy. He's at every important party. His name's always cropping up in the gossip columns of the newspaper. Gawker would blog his every move today. Dagny Taggart goes to upbraid him for the things she thinks are his irresponsibility. And she finds him not busy over business, even bad business, but playing marbles on the floor of an elite hotel. But when we see him at work, we see who he really is. Pitching in at Hank Rearden's steel mill, he's awesomely competent. On vacation from the revolution in Galt's Gulch, he's building, mining, he's got all kinds of projects going. That shows that he's really a hero. And it makes the reader wonder, if someone so purposeful seems to be doing something aimless, what is he really up to? Now, in normal life, we often hear this message, that we work in order to have leisure and have fun. But Ayn Rand inverted that message. In Atlas, the heroes take leisure, but only in so much as it enables them to get back to the work they love. Now, the reason for this is that Ayn Rand regarded productive work as what she called the central value in life. It's through productive work that we sustain our lives, through the money we earn, through the goods we produce, and we can keep for ourselves, and the things we can use to keep ourselves fed, clothed, housed, and shod, and entertained, and enlightened, and enriched. It's through productive work that we reshape our world to remake it the way we want it. So Rand said that our work should be at the center of our value system. Doing what it takes to get the right work, to do the best work, to make the most of our work, has to be a top priority in life. And it's not an afterthought. It's how we spend most of our waking hours as adults. And again, it's how we actually support our lives. But in Atlas Shrugged, this commitment to productive work isn't just the idea that jobs come first, though surely for Dagny Taggart, Eddie Willers, and Hank Rearden, the job does come first. But there's a deeper idea at work, though, the idea that life itself is like a business project. There's a classic scene when the reader is first getting to know Hank Rearden as he walks home from his mills after the first pouring of Rearden metal. his revolutionary new alloy. And he thinks back over the past decades and the techniques that he's created and the factories he's built and all the struggles in everything that mattered most to him. And Rand writes, "The red glow was a narrow strip far to the west. Above it, at a distance of miles, the words of a neon sign stood written across the blackness of the sky. Rearden Steel." And he stood straight, as if before a bench of judgment. He thought that in the darkness of this night, other signs were lighted over the country. Rearden Ore, Rearden Coal, Rearden Limestone. He thought of the days behind him, and he wished it were possible to light a neon sign above them saying, Rearden Life. Now, David Kelly has called the attitude of Rand's heroes the entrepreneurial approach to life. What Rand projects for us in Atlas Shrugged is the idea that each of us can be heroes in our own story. We can be, and in fact we must be, we can be the active creators of our lives, taking responsibility for achieving our goals. Traditional ethics had created roles for people, some to be princes, some to be peasants. But in Atlas Shrugged, there are no peasants by nature. There are only peasants through human vice and failure. Consider Cheryl Brooks, who marries the useless railroad CEO, James Taggart. When she meets him for the first time, she's a young woman who's come to the big city, working in a pharmacy where he goes in to buy a tissue. She's working retail, in other words, and she's looking for somewhere to fit in. She's looking to make her mark and forge her own trail. And that's what makes her so tragic in the novel. The wealthy and shiftless Taggart woos her and marries her. He wants to turn her from a peasant girl into a queen, hoping that will really make him a king. But he takes away from her control of her life and replaces the simple truth of her work and struggle with his lies, his whining, his hatred of everything good, and his unearned money. And we can see that she should have been in charge of her life. The Cheryl Brooks should have been making her own way. She wasn't ever a peasant, and she didn't need to be made into a queen. She was meant to be something better, the entrepreneur of her own life, steering her own course and dealing with others honestly to get where she was going. Now, this lecture has career as its titular theme, and I meant that as a placeholder, in part, for a discussion of the working life in general. But a career as such is worth considering in this context. Now, a career is a sustained, long-term commitment to an area of work or a profession. One can have a career as a lawyer, a professor, as an entrepreneur, as a serial entrepreneur, founding one company after another. One can have a career as a housekeeper, a factory worker, or a garbage collector, and so on. But why does one need a career? Well, a career allows us to focus our productive energies over the long term and develop skills needed to be most effective. In this sense, approaching one's work as a career applies not just in the world of paid work, but also in any serious productive endeavor. And for this reason, Ayn Rand argued that being a full-time parent is an activity that, if it makes sense to pursue it at all, it makes sense to pursue it seriously, developing one's skills, focusing on the task as a career requires. Now, I have a friend whose attempt to avoid a career proves why a career is valuable and important. And my friend, when he was around 20, declared that what he really wanted to do with the rest of his life was engage in a series of unrelated events. A series of unrelated events. The last thing he wanted was a career or a career track. Nothing like that. He wanted one adventure after the next. Now, he found a career, after all, as a management consultant, moving from one firm to the next, and from one business problem to the next. And his jobs really are unrelated in that sense. But they're also deeply linked because they call on the central pool of skills that he's developed over the course of his career. Now, in Atlas Shrugged, Dagny Taggart Hank Rearden, and Eddie Willers, and Robert Stadler are examples of people who've committed to a career. Indeed, virtually anyone of competence in Atlas is someone who's chosen a line of work that fits their character, or to which they have fitted their character. What I find interesting in Atlas Shrugged is the careers, or lack thereof, of the three revolutionaries. John Galt, Francisco d'Anconia, and Ragnar Daneskjöld. Since not long after finishing their studies, these men have devoted themselves to careers in Galt's revolution, and they've gotten good at it. Galt is the Pied Piper of the movement, identifying people who can be brought into his strike, and tracking the pulse of the major companies, and honing his pitch for rationality, individualism, and freedom. I mean, what do you think he's doing down in the tunnels of the Taggart Railroad? He's not just whiling away his time, he's working up the perfect 10-word pitch to grab that CEO who never thought of quitting. And Francisco, for his part, has become a deconstructor of moribund companies and a hoister of fools by their own petards. And Ragnar has become a pirate, the best in the world. And in a way, these are like careers in wartime. That is, the career of a wartime soldier. That is, if they win, they won't need these careers. And in fact, the career skills may not be useful. I mean, if they win, Galt won't need to find people who are despairing anymore. Nor will he need to sell people on quitting. In fact, he shouldn't do either of these things if he weren't trying to bring down a corrupt civilization. And similarly, if they win, Francisco will need to build companies, not unbuild them. He needs to exploit the wisdom of rational people to mutual benefit, rather than exploiting the foolishness of irrational people in mutually impoverishing ways, which is what he's doing in Atlas Shrugged mostly. And if they win, Ragnar will need to return to philosophy and stop blowing up boats. So it's very good that they take a month, a year away from their revolutionary struggle to work in the real world, in a place where positive action is valued, in Galt's Gulch. It's where they keep up at least some aspect of the positive careers they can pursue in the real world. And that's going to prove useful. And it's where we see who they really are and what they're really capable of, as I mentioned earlier in relation to Francisco. Now, choosing a career will be one of your most serious decisions, and continuing to engage in it and maintain it as well. Changing a career once you have one is hard. Many workers are experiencing this today as they try in midlife, in the midst of a financial crisis, an economic crisis, to find jobs in new areas, different lines of work from where they've been. And then they find that they can't earn as much in the new jobs because they don't have the skills they need to be highly productive in those new areas. They're starting over in every sense. In Atlas Shrugged, John Galt gave a long speech diagnosing the ills of the culture. And in it, Ayn Rand lays out her ethical view. And we might call it the ethic of achievement, because its theme is how to live and be happy to the fullest and best extent possible. It's a practical ethic meant to guide one's life. Rand summarized it as rational self-interest. And one way that we can summarize it is just to take a look at its major virtues for a second. So Rand defined her ethic in relation, well, she implemented it in these 7 principal virtues: the rationality rather than unreason or faith, productiveness rather than laziness and dependency, pride rather than humility and self-abnegation and self-sacrifice, integrity rather than pragmatism and inconsistency, honesty rather than falsehood and deception and misrepresentation, independence rather than depending on other people for their thoughts or for support, and justice rather than mercy, rather than different rules for different people, but one justice for all people. And I can't help but mention that though it's not in Atlas Shrugged, I think consistent with Atlas Shrugged is the virtue of benevolence that David Kelly's argued for in his book, Unrugged Individualism. Now, in particular, in this talk, I want to focus on 2 virtues of these, two of these virtues, and really three subsidiary, or what we objectivists call minor virtues, of these two major virtues. And the minor virtues in question are responsibility, creativity, and loyalty. And I think they're especially important in a career. Now, responsibility and creativity are aspects of the objectivist virtue of productiveness. They mean what you think they mean, taking responsibility for one's goals and getting things done, and creativity and finding new and better ways to reach one's goals. Insofar as work involves organized activity aimed at goals, it's pretty clear why we need a virtue of getting things done and doing things better. And the third virtue I want to emphasize is loyalty. That is to say, in relation to work, I want to emphasize it. Now, loyalty isn't a virtue you hear about much in objectivist circles. At least not in the circles I run in. And blind loyalty to a tribe, a family, or a group, a loyalty based in duty and not values, isn't a virtue at all. It's a vice. But loyalty has a valid and important meaning. Now, what follows is my own view based on the work of Roger Donway in an essay he wrote called The Moral Tradition, the Concept of Loyalty, in our former magazine Navigator back in February of 1998. Happy to give you the site if you'd like to track it down. Hopefully it will be up on our website sometime soon. But in any case, I'm informed by Donway's argument, but really this is my argument and a little different from Roger's. See, a bit making a point that Roger doesn't emphasize, I would say that loyalty is a form of the broader virtue of integrity. So integrity is the virtue of acting on principle, of acting for the sake of your full context, long-term values, rather than short-term incentives. And Donway argues that we need a concept of loyalty, rather than just integrity, to deal with the fact that there's competition and conflict in society. Now please don't understand me. Ayn Rand argued that there are no conflicts of interest among rational people, and this is true. In fact, I've written essays about why it's true. But here we're talking about fundamental interests, such as the interest in living and being able to be happy. Those are the interests that don't conflict. But in particular situations, there are many short-term, non-fundamental conflicts, such as the competition between firms like Southwest Airlines and United. They both can't get me flying on the same day at the same time. If I'm buying a ticket, I'm going to have to buy it from one of them. Can't buy it from both. Well, I could, but I'm not going to. Or another example is the search for love, where one can't always have the love of everyone one would like to have the love of, and sometimes one can't find anyone at all to love, which is sad. And there's plenty of these kind of little conflicts that arise, and this isn't really the place where I talk about how this all integrates in the no conflicts of interest view, but you can read my view if you search for conflicts of interest on the Atlas Society website. So, loyalty in this context, and this is Roger Donway's point, means having integrity in one's choice of people and institutions to work and deal with. In the context of love, it means upholding the long-term value of one's love relationship, even though there are ups and downs in any love. And almost anyone is attracted to other people at some time or another, other than one's lover. In work, it means upholding commitments to one's employer and appreciating the long-term value of one's best colleagues and clients. It means not acting against one's firm, or against one's employees, or against one's valued clients. Now, I want to talk about how the ethic of achievement applies to everyone in their work and their career. There's an ethics of achievement for Hank Rearden, and an ethics of achievement for Eddie Willers. And these three virtues of responsibility, creativity, and loyalty apply in both cases, but in each case in its own way. So let me turn to the issue of ethics for Rearden and Dagny Taggart. The principal heroes in Atlas Shrugged are titanic producers and organizers. And there's no doubt that Rand's ethic of achievement is an ethic of achievement for a great producer. Rand has a political and moral message in Atlas Shrugged, that the atlases who carry society on their shoulders are not to be taken for granted, but they have the moral right to live and be happy and to do business. And there's no doubt that this is an ethic for a Rearden or a Dagny Taggart, or in real life for a Steve Jobs, or a Henry Ford, or a Jeff Bezos. The entrepreneurial life applies most directly to the business titan as an entrepreneur. A Rearden is someone who brings great ability and great virtue to great tasks. Life is risky, and he doesn't mind the risk, preferring to have as much control as he can and determined to make his own way. I should also say that there's a sense in which you can take over a moribund firm and bring it to life the way Atlas trustee John Anglioloro has, and you're engaged in that same kind of creative activity. The scope of Rearden's activity is wide, but it's also abstract. And to my mind, the best business leaders can, like Rearden or Dagny Taggart, do work from the bottom up in their companies. I mean, it's not like they're not capable of working up and down anywhere in the company if they had to. But that's not really the point. The point is, what do they really spend their time on? And Rearden's time is really directed to broad issues of corporate strategy, research direction, finding the major clients and contracts the company needs. When the Equalization of Opportunity Bill passes and Rearden has to figure out how to divest his subsidiaries, that's what he spends his time doing. He doesn't just retreat to the lab or to the mine or to the factory floor. That's not what his job mostly involves. That's not the responsibility he's taken on in running the company. So an entrepreneur like Rearden has a wide ambit for setting the direction of his firm and his own work. He sets his own terms. But he gives something up to do that work. He gives up the ability to focus on the work in the lab, or to focus on the work in the mine, or to focus on the work in the factory. Now, I want to distinguish here between an entrepreneur and a corporate executive or manager. The scope of the work that both an entrepreneur, corporate head, and a CEO do is very similar in terms of having broad strategic scope, at least once the firm gets beyond the startup stage and the entrepreneur stops doing all the work himself. But now, an entrepreneur, as the founder of a firm, sets the terms for the enterprise. He's in total control of the contracts, the mission, the vision, the choice of people, etc. He forms a common understanding with other staff about where the firm is going. Steve Davis of SpaceX will be here tomorrow to talk about the vision of Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX. Steve has bought into that vision. And so what he'll be speaking about is his shared understanding with Musk of what that vision is. But it's a vision that Musk, as the founder, originally chose. And it's worth noting that Steve Davis is himself actually an entrepreneur too. That is, he has his own business, the Mr. Yogato Yogurt Shops, which just opened a new branch. It's here in the DC area. And the business shares his individual wacky, humorous sensibility because he set it up, he defined it, and he set the terms, and he guides it. But that's not the case in SpaceX, where he's an employee and Musk is the entrepreneur founder. Oops. Now, consider Dagny Taggart. She didn't found Taggart Transcontinental, nor did her brother James. James got his job as CEO because people felt he deserved it, like a prince. But Dagny rose to her vice president in charge of operations position because she filled the roles in each of her jobs as she went along that fit the predefined mission of the firm that everyone had already bought into. Its shareholders and its clients and its workers. neither she nor James could assume they owned the firm and could switch directions at will. They had to answer to the board. Indeed, when Dagny wants to be the launch customer for Rearden Metal, the Taggart board balks. You all can boo and hiss. You can boo and hiss. Shh, exactly. So Dagny turned from being a manager in the Taggart Corporation to being an entrepreneur and founding John Galt Incorporated to follow her own vision on her own terms. Now, today we live in the era of visionary CEOs. They're supposed to yank the company in a new direction, but they should beware of thinking of themselves as entrepreneurs. Their situation is really kind of different. Let me give you an example. Carly Fiorina took over the venerable and successful company Hewlett-Packard, which at the time specialized in printers, and she was able to sell the company with some difficulty on the idea of going in a new direction and the idea of merging with compact computers. So we now have HP computers and printers. And Mark Hurd, who followed her, was a hit as CEO of a combined HP and Compaq until a very ancillary personal scandal brought him down. And Hurd was successful because he executed the vision that Fiorina had sold and actually executed it better than she was executing it. But see, he doesn't come in and say, I'm going to yank you off in a whole new direction. He came in and said, I'm going to make what you all have and what you've all agreed to do work. And that made him very popular. It made the firm work better, and the shareholders loved it too. But last year, Leo Apotheker took over the merged firm, and he tried to act like it was his firm. And he announced high-handedly that the firm was going to quit hardware production and focus on software. And he's not CEO of Hewlett-Packard today. He summarily got the boot because he confused being a CEO with being a founder and entrepreneur. It wasn't his company, it was his company to manage. Now, Hank Rearden needs the ethic of achievement in all its parts. He needs the virtues, the business virtues of productiveness, especially creativity, to see his own path forward and define for himself his career and his company goals and means. And he needs the responsibility to see that it all happens. And loyalty's key. Loyalty to his project once he's launched it. Loyalty to the employees and the other investors who join him in his vision. Loyalty to deserving clients who build his customer base long term. When our current CEO, Aaron Day, joined the Atlas Society, he told me he couldn't come on full-time because he owed it to his investors to see if he could keep making Tangerine Wellness grow and work. And he's really, as he already explained today, has really come on as CEO on a more full-time basis, a bit out of despair, which is sad. I mean, and hope for our organization, of course. I mean, that's we've got action and we're going places, but you know, it's not despair for life, but it was despair over his company, Tangerine. And that's sad, because it's a good company. Okay, now let me move on to ethics for Eddie Willers and Tom Colby. Now I want to turn to the business ethic of an Eddie Willers, someone like Eddie Willers, or like Tom Colby, for instance, who's the foreman in Rearden Steel Mill and the head of the Free Workers Union. That is, the union that you join because you want to, not because you're forced to. And the union where if you go on strike and you can't get better terms, you can be fired. That union, you know, where you're actually honest workers. Okay. Now, Eddie and Tom are like most of us in holding down a normal job in a defined organization and not being a leader and change agent. And it isn't really perfectly obvious that Eddie or Tom is living the entrepreneurial life. He's not able or inclined to run industries. He's not able or inclined to switch from being a manager in operations, that is, Eddie isn't, to having to make a rail engine run on his own. He didn't set out to strike out on his own. But in a meaningful way, each is the captain of his own life. Each needs the ethic of achievement to live and seek rational values. Each chooses his job to best suit his goals and talents, to let him be the most that he can be. Eddie and Tom need responsibility in their careers to accomplish the goals, their own goals, and show their employers and colleagues their trustworthiness and values. And value. As you need to show responsibility in your career, to show everyone that you can get the job done. And every worker is going to have responsibilities. Every worker is going to have projects to complete, and tonnage totals to finish, cars to repair, phone calls to answer, whatever it is. When you say, I will do that, when you say, I can take care of that, then it's imperative that you take hold of that task and you get it done in the best way you can. That's showing that you mean your words and you're someone that others can count on. It's showing that you can do your job and that you can really depend on yourself in the end. And someone like Eddie or Tom needs, they're more ordinary workers, needs creativity. All of us, in every line of work, needs creativity. We need to work as human beings, thinking how to make things work better. On the factory floor today, the best workers do their jobs reliably and they work hard, for sure, but they also develop ideas about how to improve processes. It's key to the Kaizen, continual improvement method. Now, loyalty is a key career virtue for Eddie and Tom as well. Now, Eddie views himself as a kind of family serf to the Taggarts. And that's not what I'm talking about. No one should think of himself in that way, as really an obligated serf to anyone. But there's a meaningful way in which, in Eddie, that attitude has been married to something valid. Eddie is deeply and personally loyal to Dagny because he admires her and he values the work that they do together. And that's a good reason to be loyal. And when you choose to work at a firm, you're choosing to participate in its mission and policies. If you don't want to sign on with those terms, then you've got to go entrepreneur. You've got to become an independent contractor. Now let me tell you, there are immense benefits to not being an entrepreneur. When you work a defined job, you get to focus on an area of work without having to worry about guiding the whole enterprise. You can develop specialized expertise and work in an area you particularly enjoy. Entrepreneurs, by contrast, have to deal with whatever comes. They often have to work at all ends of the business. An ordinary worker in a good firm can find a level of leadership that works for him and can find colleagues that are good to work with and can do work he can be proud of. Now, ordinary workers like Eddie need to think about where their firm's going. I mean, like a CEO, even an ordinary worker has to think not as much as a CEO does, but they have to think about where their firm's going. Just as a CEO needs to think about what do the workers actually do in my firm. There's a difference of scope and scale here in the way each worker lives and where they focus their thought and energies. Your CEO will spend a lot of time thinking about where the whole firm is going. Your Eddie Willers will spend relatively little. Your CEO will spend relatively little time thinking about what Eddie does with his time. Eddie will spend a ton of time thinking about what he and his team are doing. But fundamentally, there's really not a difference in kind, because even ordinary workers need to know why they should be loyal to their firm and why they work here and not elsewhere. And so you know why you should be loyal. When Steve Davis comes to talk about SpaceX, be assured he knows why he works there. He could get other jobs. He has other jobs, but he works there. Now, SpaceX has given me the brightest image I've seen in many years of what it can mean to have the right job. So bear with me for a second while I try and run a little film for you.
And everything looks great. It continues to circle the globe. You can hear the audience here. Everyone at SpaceX, we've got 1,800 plus people. We're all working really hard, and we're on our way to a great mission. We still have We still have 3.5 days, a lot of test maneuvers before we get to the station. So stay in touch with us at SpaceX.com and Twitter, and continue to cheer us on.
All right, this was the end of the webcast of the recent launch of the Dragon spacecraft of SpaceX. And if you weren't following the news, they launched it. It functioned perfectly. It went to the space station. It came back. Now, look at these webcasters. Are they professional broadcasters? Are they PR flacks? No, they aren't. Their names are John Innsbrucker on the left, Jessica Jensen in the middle, and Kevin Brogan on the right. John Innsbrucker is the product director for the Falcon 9 launch vehicle. He oversees the construction of rockets. Kevin Brogan on the right is a staff engineer in the propulsion group. He's a rocket scientist, a rocket engineer, in other words. Jessica Jensen in the center is not a newscaster. She's the manager of the Dynamic Environments Group. Her team tries to minimize shock and vibration in the SpaceX rockets and spacecraft. And she works with their clients to make sure their satellites, cargo, and other items that they're sending will survive on the flight into space. I mean, other items like human beings. Now, are these folks like Eddie Willers? Well, Eddie was not a nobody. Eddie was a manager working under the vice president for operation of the most important railroad in the United States. But these folks are not entrepreneurs. They've sought out the best job they could in a field that fascinates them and inspires them. And hey, now I don't know them at all. I mean, Steve Davis might know them. You can ask him. But though they aren't entrepreneurs, I think we can presume that they live entrepreneurial lives. I could tell that from earlier in the webcast when they talked about what they did and why they did it, and you could see their attitude about it. They think about what inspires them and interests them, and then they construct their lives in order to be able to do that. Now, just as I distinguish between the entrepreneur and the CEO, here, as I said, as I distinguish between the entrepreneur and the CEO, here I want to distinguish between, on the one hand, the value-seeking worker, and on the other hand, let me get this right. What I want to distinguish between is, on the one hand, the value-seeking worker, that is a worker who lives the entrepreneurial life, and on the other hand, a time-serving, disloyal, uncreative, and irresponsible worker, the grudging, half-hearted worker. We've seen all the difference wherever we've worked. We know who stood on their own feet and who brought value to the workplace and who didn't. Some people think because they're being paid and doing some work, they're good workers. But that's just the time-serving attitude, and it won't keep one being paid and doing work over the long term, except in government jobs. I'm not kidding. It's the worker living the entrepreneurial life who can have what Innsbrucker, Jensen, and Brogan were having just this May. And actually, as if you saw the cheering of all the SpaceX employees, you could see that a lot of them were having that moment. They can have the job of a lifetime. They can have the job of supporting life and a job that makes life worth living. There's an ethic of achievement for all of us. For all of us, a serious view of career and what work will do is perhaps the most important issue in our lives. There's one objectivist ethics and one core set of principles for work. The principles apply differently in the different cases, but it's the same music in a different key. An entrepreneur has the freedom to define his own work, and the responsibility is to himself in the end to make it all happen. But it takes creativity, and it takes loyalty to everyone worthy that he develops strong business ties with, or who join him in his projects. And someone who's not an entrepreneur has the freedom to focus in on the work he loves, the freedom to shop around in a rich and varied job market, where others provide the framework and deal with the enterprise-wide hassles. And one can join a thriving institution like a university or a corporation that's already set up and running. And one can delve into details, and there's a rich load of things to learn and to do and to grow with there. And any of you in any work, you succeed by being responsible, by being creative, and by being loyal. Loyal to the companies you choose to work for the right reasons, because it serves you in the long term. In Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand had a point to make about the role of highly productive business people and the role of the free market. She wanted everyone to understand that the mind drives production, and our civilization depends on the efforts of the atlases who organize and create huge prodigies of production. And so the heroes of Atlas are larger than life and titanic in their abilities. But her ethic of achievement is for everyone, in every walk of life. Make the most of it, and make the most of your work life and your career, or the careers that you pursue. Thank you.
Okay. Will was spot on in his timing. Will, I'm just going to go ahead and say, anyone who has questions coming up to the mic, and Will, I'll let you go ahead and field the questions. And
Sure.
You're an expert at this. So.
Yeah, thanks.
Do it, Will. And
Thanks.
yay, SpaceX. Everyone go to SpaceX.
Yay. Jackie?
Peter principle. For those who don't remember what it is, it's you work at a job and you do well, you get promoted. You do well, you get promoted. You don't do well, and you don't get promoted, and you're stuck in a job where you're not doing well. So in an objectivist career, what would happen?
Well, I mean, there's injustice in work too, so I know that it's nice if you're working in a place where, because you do a good job, you get promoted, and because you do a good job, you get promoted, and then because you don't do a good job, you don't get promoted, but then there you are at a fairly promoted level, not doing a good job. You know, I think we'd have to say, at the point where you stop doing a good job, you went beyond your level. You know, and that's not the place for you. That's not what's working for you, and you need to look at yourself and say, is this really working for me in terms of my job definition and whatever, in terms of my enjoyment in life? There's also a time when you get there and you go, well, if I shifted to a little bit different job in the same career, maybe, so I can still use my skills, but I have to move laterally and down or something like that, or move over to another company and start, but in the same field, so it's not, you know, it's not a total reboot. That's tough to do because you'll have to give up some salary to do it. But I guess Objectivism says think about that really seriously, because think about how much, if you get up in the morning and you think about your work, you get excited and you want to do those things. And how much do you get up and drag yourself in and think, well, at least they're paying me? Because if it's getting to the point where at least they're paying me, Objectivism is going to ask, this is your life. You know, it's your choices, but this is your life. And certainly being paid is key. You shouldn't do something you love and not get any pay and therefore die. That's idiotic. But you need a unity of your mind and body, your values. You need a unity between your pecuniary values and your spiritual values. And so I think you have to find that kind of work that you can enjoy doing and that pays you because you're good. You know, that's Diana?
Yes, my question has to do with loyalty. So often the word refers to something deplorable. And I was wondering how you feel about looking at it this way, that loyalty has to be to principles or values. And loyalty to individuals or institutions is secondary and derivative, and it depends on their adherence to those principles and values.
Yes. Yes. I suppose with the caveat that when we're dealing with individuals, and maybe with institutions too, there's something that's maybe not exactly values, that was the equivalent of their talent. that can make someone worth some attention to you too. That is, it's their value to you. Someone may not be that may not be the best themselves they can be, but they can still be pretty awesome. You know, Francisco d'Anconia on a bad day was awesome. He was so talented. And so there's this sort of distinction. You're saying, what are his chosen values? Some of the thing that makes him valuable to you are not values that he's necessarily chosen, but rather the way he is. And some institutions are like that because they have a good institutional structure, a kind of secret sauce in the way it's set up, even though the president of the university right now is an idiot, and the chair of your department is a deplorable moron, and yet the department's really well set up in a good field. The university brings in good students, has good researchers, the reputation is carrying it along, and so that kind of DNA helps it going. I don't know, I'm feeling my way through the theory of this a little bit there. It was a good question, actually. Thank you. Eric?
Wonderful talk, Will. Enjoyed
Thank you.
it a lot. This is really kind of a whimsical question. Not a lot of gravity here, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is a point, yet another point, that gets the left exercised and agitated and angry with us. Eddie Willers gets left behind at the end, in the last chapter of Atlas Shrugged. And there he is, trudging down the railroad tracks into the sunset, and yet he embodies enormous value to the producers. And the producers can't produce without the Eddie Willers. And it's a point that Rand, well, I think it's clear to us, but I guess this is a question of rhetoric and argument. And
You're saying, what do I think of that?
How do you address that when arguing with lefties?
Well, there's multiple levels. So there's a question of what is Rand doing as a novelist in Atlas Shrugged, and I think I'll just come back to that in just a second, versus what does objectivism hold, which is a little different. Although I think it's safe to say that in Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand is trying to show that Eddie Willers needs Dagny Taggart, but Dagny Taggart doesn't need Eddie Willers in the same way. Because in the Gulch, the productive titans are doing just fine, you know, hoeing corn and making fantastic motors, and hoeing corn and writing concertos. Because they're very capable people who can do it from the top to the bottom, and if they have to do it, they will. They can do a lot more if they've got a lot of Eddies to work with, but the point she's trying to make is that Eddie can't make the locomotive go on his own. That's the point she's trying to make with doing that. And I think it is sad. I'd say to the leftist, if you're thinking that what Rand is saying is that the ordinary worker needs to go die, she's not. What she is saying is, look at yourself, and what would happen if all the amazing, you're sitting there on your iPhone and it's the center of your life. Could you have invented any of that? Could you have even dreamed of it 15 years ago? I don't think so. I don't really think so. You know, I was watching an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation just recently, and they were walking around the bridge of the Enterprise, this is in the mid-'80s, with a thin slate in their hand going do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And I'll tell you, there's a way in which, you know, I remember seeing that and just thinking, that is cool and so science fiction-y, you know. I don't, you know, I guess I'll see, you know, Starflight before I see that, right? And of course now I've got one. But anyway, and I couldn't have made it. So there's lots of things where we depend on that. Now, even if you run a great company and make stuff, you know, even Steve Jobs would depend on lots of things. And Steve Jobs himself was kind of a super designer who understood tech, not necessarily the guy that could have even built his own whole computer himself. With no Steve Wozniak, maybe there's no Apple, and without all the other engineers and, you know, that he organized, inspired, cajoled, worked with. So there's definitely a dependency there in reality that I think that's true, and objectivism doesn't deny that. I mean, the point that's being made in Atlas Shrugged is really about what would happen to civilization if the people that really produce outsized benefits for everyone else stopped doing it. And that's what the point that Rand's really trying to make, not trying to say that everyone else is useless. Although she does think there's a lot of useless people. Now, another thing I was going to say about Rand is that I think, just as a novelist, you can discern in her novels this kind of love of aristocracy, or this ideal of aristocracy. Francisco d'Anconia's family is from a former Spanish aristocratic thing. Eddie thinks of the Taggarts as kind of the aristocracy that he serves. And this is in other novels of hers. And she doesn't, in the end, she won't really defend it as a principle, but she really wants the aristocrats to be aristo. And she really wants to spend her time around the best of the bestest, the most awesome of the most arrogantly wonderful of the most arrogantly wonderful. And that's a little bit of her sense of life and what she really liked. And there's nothing wrong with it from the point of view of her philosophy, but her philosophy is not a pro-aristo philosophy as such. It's not. No, an aristocracy of merit in the context of trade, so that you accept no aristocrat that you don't choose. You see? So that no one can be an aristocrat to you unless you recognize the value of the relationship and you choose it. So yes, so in that sense, yes, some people end up with more power and some less, some more influence and some less. So I guess yes, an aristocracy in that sense, but rooted in this fundamental equality, rooted in a trade relationship and voluntarism. Yes, by merit. Yes, to be a hero is to be a merit by merit. If you got a question, line up the mic. I don't know how we're doing for final time here. Mark and Q&A. Yes, we still got time for a few questions. Jackie?
Because productive work is so important, should objectivists not want to ever retire? Or if they retire, they still should be doing something productive, not playing golf?
I agree. I agree. Quitting productive work killed my father. So, no, that's not why I agree, but it's an anecdote. He stopped working and died. But I was going to say I agree with that in general. That is, you live your own life and you make your own choices, and I understand people balance out their lives differently. But I think that what objectivism says is that let me back up just a second. There's a definite life cycle to the way we earn and save and spend, and we're humans and we're mortal and we have a life cycle. So that's all perfectly fine. But I think objectivism does say that we need productive work because we need to be engaged in making the world good for ourselves. And so we need to have productive projects that we're engaged in and that are making a difference and that are using our skills and helping us to develop. And I think that's true even if one's gotten to the point where one doesn't want to do the full-time job or doesn't feel capable of doing the full-time job that one had done before. One gets to a financial place where one goes, I was doing this partly for financial reasons and I just don't have those reasons anymore. It's not that I hated my job, but the financial reasons made a difference. And now they don't. And so I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do something different with my time. But it's doing something with your time that's productive for you. I think that's important. And I think in objectivism there's an idea that, leisure itself, as an end in itself, is a kind of sad state. I think so in objectivism, even though for me laziness is definitely a vice. So, well, I don't see anyone else queued up. So, Don, if you've got a question, you can. You want to see the video again?
Yes.
All right. I didn't know if anyone did. All right. If you want to see the video again. All right. All right. Again, this is the last moments of the webcast. The Dragon spacecraft has been launched on a Falcon 9 rocket. They'd had a scrubbed launch at the last minute a few days before. There were real questions of whether this all would work, and they've gotten it up. It's been separated from the rocket, and one of the first major iterations of the untested technology was the extension of the photovoltaic arrays, and that's what they're announcing. And for everyone in SpaceX, this is the sign. See, without the arrays, the spacecraft would have to come back to Earth immediately because it wouldn't have the energy to sustain itself. So this is the sign that it's all completely working in space. And so for these SpaceX, also I'd like to point out, this is the factory floor at SpaceX. That's where they built their rocket and their spacecraft.
And everything looks great. It continues to circle the globe. You can hear the audience here. Everyone at SpaceX, we've got 1,800 plus people. We're all working really hard, and we're on our way to a great mission. We still have 3.5 days, a lot of test maneuvers before we get to the station. So stay in touch with us at SpaceX.com and Twitter, and continue to cheer us on.
Well, I thought that was a nice
Okay.
visual contrast also with Houston.
Yes. Yeah, you all see that's mission control at SpaceX with all the employees watching through a giant window and and cheering for it.
Okay. Technology on video screen.
Yes.
Anyway, that's very nice.
Okay, two things. First of all, let's all thank Will for an excellent talk. And